The ranch, the cattle operation, the land my grandfather homesteaded in 1889, all of it was gone. My son Caleb smirked at me across the dining table, called me a burden who'd been riding their coattails for decades, while Marcus and Ethan nodded in agreement. I just smiled, signed every page without trembling, and walked out. Quietly. With the dignity my grandmother taught me 73 years ago when she told me a woman's strength shows most when the world tries to break her. 3 days later, my phone lit up, 67 missed calls. Karma had arrived faster than I expected. But let me back up and tell you how I discovered their plan before they even served me those papers on my 75th birthday. Hello everyone, thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're watching from. Feel free to share it in the comments. They actually believed I was downstairs making myself tea that night. Ethan laughed as he told Caleb that the old heating vent from the master bedroom leads straight down to the study. I pressed my ear to the grate in our bedroom closet, every word grew clearer. My husband Marcus was speaking in that calm, calculated tone he used when closing business deals. Caleb, is the lawyer absolutely certain the divorce filing is airtight? The land transfer documents too? I don't want any complications when we bring Vanessa into the house. My heart stopped. Vanessa. The 42-year-old real estate developer who'd been circling our property for 2 years, the woman I'd seen Marcus having lunch with 3 times last month. He told me those were business meetings about selling some of our northern acreage. Ethan's voice cut through next, cold and businesslike. Dad, I already transferred the LLC ownership documents to our attorney. Mom signed the partnership modification papers last year when you told her it was for tax purposes. She has no idea those papers made her a silent partner with 0 ownership rights. The ranch, the mineral rights, the water shares, legally, she owns nothing. Caleb added something that made my blood run cold. And the prenup from 1975 is ironclad. Mom gets nothing except a $10,000 settlement. That's less than one of our bulls is worth. She'll have to leave with whatever fits in her car. I've already drafted the eviction notice to serve with the divorce papers. They laughed. My own sons laughed about making their 75-year-old mother homeless. I stood in that closet for another hour, listening to them plan my destruction like I was a business problem to solve. They discussed which furniture Vanessa wanted to keep, how quickly they could rebrand the ranch operation, even which of my horses they'd sell first because Vanessa was allergic to the smell. Marcus mentioned my birthday as the perfect day to serve the papers, poetic justice he called it, since I'd wasted 50 years of his life. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, thinking about every sacrifice I'd made. 50 years of marriage. Raising 2 sons on this remote Montana ranch while Marcus built his wealth. The years I spent managing the books, negotiating with feed suppliers, nursing sick cattle through harsh winters. The inheritance from my parents that I'd poured into expanding our operation when Marcus's oil speculation deal went bust in 1991. They were going to erase me like I'd never existed. But they'd made one critical mistake. They thought I was just a simple rancher's wife who didn't understand business or law. They forgot who taught Marcus everything he knows about land management and livestock operations. They forgot I'd been running this ranch since before either of my sons was born. And they had no idea that I'd been quietly preparing for this exact moment ever since I saw Marcus's first text message to Vanessa 6 months ago. I wasn't going to fight them. I was going to destroy them. I woke up on my 75th birthday to silence. No coffee brewing, no breakfast smells, nothing. I came downstairs in my robe and found them waiting in the dining room like a corporate board meeting. Marcus sat at the head of the table where my father used to sit, wearing his expensive suit. Caleb and Ethan flanked him in their lawyer clothes, leather briefcases open. The morning sun came through the windows I'd washed every spring for 5 decades, highlighting the cold expressions on their faces. Sit down, Isla, Marcus said, not even bothering with happy birthday. He slid a stack of papers across the table, at least 60 pages thick. "We need you to sign these today. All of them. We have the notary coming at noon, so let's make this quick and civilized." His tone was the same one he'd used to fire ranch hands who'd worked for us for years. Efficient. Heartless. Final. I sat down slowly, my arthritis making my knees crack. I looked at each of them, these men I'd loved and sacrificed for. Caleb wouldn't meet my eyes. Ethan stared at his phone, typing away like I wasn't even there. Marcus just looked impatient, checking his watch. I picked up the first document and saw the words "petition for dissolution of marriage" at the top. "You're divorcing me?" I said, keeping my voice steady. "On my birthday?" Marcus sighed like I was being dramatic. "Isla, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We've grown apart. You know that. I've met someone who shares my vision for the future. Someone younger, more dynamic. You'll be fine. There's a settlement in there, $10,000. That's more than fair considering the prenup." Caleb finally spoke, his lawyer voice cold and professional. "Mom, you need to understand the legal reality here. The prenuptial agreement you signed in 1975 is crystal clear. In the event of divorce, you receive a fixed settlement, no alimony, no property division. The ranch, the business, all assets remain with Dad. You signed papers last year that modified your ownership status in the LLC. Technically, you haven't owned any part of this operation since last April." I looked at the papers in front of me, flipping through them slowly. Divorce decree. Quitclaim deed for the ranch property. Transfer of water rights. Relinquishment of mineral rights. Notice to vacate the premises within 24 hours. Everything legally worded, professionally prepared, designed to strip me of 50 years of my life in one afternoon. They'd thought of everything. "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" I asked quietly. Ethan looked up from his phone for the first time. "Mom, you're being dramatic. You have friends. Maybe stay with Aunt Pauline for a while until you figure things out. We packed a suitcase for you already, it's by the front door. Your truck still runs, right? The old Ford?" He said it like he was being generous, letting me keep the 1987 pickup truck I'd bought with my own money 30 years ago. I looked down at the papers again, then at the pen Marcus had placed beside them. An expensive Mont Blanc pen, the one I'd given him for our 40th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. "And if I refuse to sign?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from their conversation last night. Marcus leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Then Caleb will file a contested divorce and will tie you up in court for years. You'll spend every penny you have on lawyers and you'll still lose. The prenup is airtight. We're trying to make this easy for you, Isla. Don't be stupid about this. Don't be stupid." Those words hung in the air like poison. 50 years of marriage, and my husband was calling me stupid for questioning why he was throwing me away like garbage on my birthday. I picked up that expensive pen and looked at each of them one more time. They looked confident, almost bored, like this was just another business transaction. They had no idea what was coming. I smiled, a real smile that seemed to confuse them, and I started signing. Every single page, one after another, my signature neat and steady despite my shaking hands. When I finished the last page, I stood up slowly, smoothed down my robe, and walked toward the front door without saying another word. Behind me, I heard Marcus exhale with relief. "Well, that was easier than I thought," he said to our sons. "Vanessa can move in this weekend." I picked up my suitcase, grabbed my purse, and walked out of the house my grandfather built. I didn't look back. I didn't cry. I just got in my old Ford truck and drove away from the only home I'd ever known, leaving them to celebrate their victory. They had no idea I'd been planning my own moves for 6 months. They had no idea about the safety deposit box in town. They had no idea I'd been documenting everything. And they definitely had no idea that in 72 hours, their entire world was going to collapse. Sometimes the best revenge is letting arrogant men think they've won right before you pull the floor out from under them. I drove straight to the Pine Ridge Motel on the edge of town, the place where truckers and traveling salesmen stayed. $29 a night, clean enough, and nobody asked questions. I sat on the thin mattress in room 114 and finally let myself feel it, the humiliation, the betrayal, the fear of being 75 and homeless. I cried for exactly 10 minutes, then I washed my face and got to work. The first thing I did was drive to First Mountain Bank where I'd had my personal account since 1968, long before I married Marcus. Shelby, the branch manager who'd known me for 40 years, looked shocked when I walked in. "Isla, honey, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I managed a small smile and asked to access my safety deposit box. What I pulled out would have shocked Marcus to his core. Inside that box were documents I'd been collecting for 6 months, ever since I first suspected Marcus was cheating. Copies of the real LLC documents showing my grandfather's land was held in a family trust with me as the primary beneficiary, documents Marcus had conveniently lost in 1982 when he convinced me to restructure the business. My grandfather's original will, which explicitly stated the land could never be sold or transferred outside the bloodline without my written consent. Marriage and divorce certificates, including the original prenup and a notarized statement from the lawyer who drafted it in 1975, admitting Marcus had pressured him to include unconscionable terms. But that wasn't all. I had 6 months of bank statements showing Marcus had been transferring money to offshore accounts, nearly $400,000 funneled to the Cayman Islands. I had printed emails between Marcus and Vanessa discussing their plan to subdivide the ranch and sell it to a development company for $12 million. I had photographs of the two of them together, time-stamped and geotagged. And I had something even more damaging, evidence that Caleb had been embezzling from the ranch operations client accounts. See, what my sons never knew was that I'd never actually stopped managing the books. Marcus thought he'd taken over the finances in 2015 when he bought that fancy accounting software, but I'd kept my own records. Every invoice, every payment, every transaction. And I'd noticed that for the past 3 years, Caleb had been billing our corporate clients for services never rendered, pocketing nearly $90,000. Ethan had been selling ranch equipment and keeping the proceeds, another $45,000 gone. I spread all these documents across the motel bed and took photographs of everything with my phone. My granddaughter Sage had taught me how to use cloud storage last Christmas, showing me how to upload documents so they'd never be lost. She'd laughed at how quickly I learned technology. "Grandma, you're better at this than my mom," she'd said. Sage had no idea her father Caleb was a thief, and I dreaded the day she'd find out. Next, I called Helena Voss, the only lawyer in 3 counties that Marcus hadn't done business with. Helena was 68, sharp as a knife, and had a reputation for destroying men who thought they could bully women in court. "Helena, this is Isla Kemper. I need your help, and I need you to not tell anyone I called." There was a pause, then Helena's knowing chuckle. "Let me guess. Marcus finally showed his true colors? I've been waiting for this call for 20 years, Isla. Come to my office tomorrow morning. And bring everything you've got." That night, I barely slept. I lay in that cheap motel room, listening to trucks on the highway and thinking about what I was about to do. This wasn't just about getting revenge on Marcus. This was about showing my sons that the woman who taught them right from wrong wouldn't tolerate them becoming criminals and cowards. This was about proving that 75 years old doesn't mean powerless. This was about taking back everything they'd stolen from me and making sure they never underestimated another woman again. The next morning, I met Helena at her office above the feed store on Main Street. I handed her a thumb drive with every document, every photo, every piece of evidence I'd collected. She plugged it into her computer, and I watched her expression change from curious to shocked to absolutely delighted. "Isla, do you realize what you have here? This isn't just grounds to void the divorce. This is fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit theft. We can not only get your property back, we can have them all facing criminal charges. I know you're probably wondering what happens next. Do me a favor, if you're enjoying this story, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support means everything. Now, let me tell you about the allies I didn't know I had." Helena made 3 phone calls while I sat in her office, and within an hour my life started shifting from victim to victor. First she called Dwight Ramsey, a forensic accountant in Billings. "Dwight, I'm sending you something interesting. A ranch wife with 50 years of records and a husband who thinks he's smarter than he is." Second call went to the Montana Department of Revenue. Third call went to the FBI field office in Helena about the offshore accounts. What Marcus didn't know was that moving money offshore to avoid taxes is a federal crime. Helena explained that the amounts triggered automatic reporting requirements he'd ignored. "Isla, your husband isn't just a cheater. He's looking at serious prison time. And your sons are accomplices." The word should have hurt, but instead I felt hope for the first time in months. Dwight arrived at 4 o'clock, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a laptop. He pulled up documents on Helena's screen. For 2 hours, he walked us through what he was seeing. "Mrs. Kemper, your husband has been systematically looting this operation for at least 5 years. Shell companies, fake vendors, consulting fees to entities that don't exist. My preliminary estimate? He's hidden close to $2 million. $2 million. From the ranch my grandfather built. From the land my father died working." I felt my hands clench into fists, my grandmother's wedding ring digging into my finger. Marcus had stolen my life's work and then divorced me to avoid sharing any of it. But Dwight wasn't finished. "The property transfers you signed? They're illegal. Your grandfather's trust documents prevent transfer outside the bloodline without your approval. Your husband forged documents in 1982 claiming the trust was dissolved, but it wasn't. Every property transfer he's made in 40 years is potentially void." Helena laughed out loud. "The land is yours. It's always been yours. Marcus has been operating a ranch he doesn't legally own for 4 decades. That's real estate fraud on a massive scale." That evening, I found Sage, my 23-year-old granddaughter, sitting on the hood of my truck at the motel, her face stained with tears. "Grandma, is it true? Dad told me you abandoned the family, that you had a breakdown. But Jenny Anderson saw you at the bank and said you looked fine, just sad. What's really happening?" I told her everything. The divorce papers. The conspiracy. Her father's embezzlement. I watched her face go from confusion to horror to rage. "Sage, this isn't your fault," I said firmly. "But I need to know something. Are you going to stand with them, or are you going to stand with me?" She didn't hesitate. "You raised me, Grandma. When Mom died and Dad was too busy, you taught me how to braid my hair and drive a stick shift and stand up for myself. I'm with you. Whatever you need." What I needed was access to the ranch. Sage told me Marcus, Caleb, and Ethan were in Billings meeting with Vanessa. The house was empty. We drove out at sunset, and Sage opened Marcus's safe with the combination I'd taught her, my birthday, ironically. Inside were the original trust documents and something more damaging, love letters between Marcus and Vanessa going back 3 years. In one, Marcus explicitly wrote about divorcing me, selling the ranch, and starting a new life in Costa Rica with Vanessa's money. Sage threw down one letter in disgust. "He's a monster, Grandma." "They all are." I gathered everything carefully. As we walked out, I took one last look at the house where I'd raised my children. This was the last time I'd be here as a victim. The next time would be as the owner. On the drive back, Sage asked the question I'd been dreading. "Grandma, what's going to happen to Dad and Uncle Ethan? Are they going to prison?" I kept my eyes on the dark Montana road. "Baby, I don't know. But what they did was wrong, and they need to face consequences. Sometimes loving someone means letting them learn the hardest way." She nodded, crying quietly. "I just wish they'd been better men." "Me too, Sage. Me too." Helena moved faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, she'd filed an emergency motion to void the divorce, filed criminal complaints, and sent demand letters to Marcus, Caleb, and Ethan informing them they were under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. She'd frozen all ranch accounts and filed liens against the property. Marcus's perfect plan was unraveling before it even started. The first call came on day 3. Marcus, his voice tight with panic. "Isla, what the hell have you done? The bank has frozen every account, including my personal checking. I can't access my own money." I was sitting in Helena's office when he called. "Marcus, I simply hired a lawyer to review the documents you forced me to sign. Turns out you don't actually own the ranch. You never did. It's held in my family's trust, and every transfer you've made is fraudulent. I'll see you in court." His voice turned vicious. "You stupid woman. Do you have any idea what you've done? I will bury you in legal fees. I will make sure you don't get a single penny. I will." I hung up. Let him rage into the void. Helena smiled at me. "That went perfectly. He's panicking, which means he knows we have him. Panicked men make mistakes." The mistake came the next day. Caleb showed up at the Pine Ridge Motel, banging on my door at 7 in the morning. "Mom. Open up. We need to talk." I opened the door to find him disheveled, his suit wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. "Mom, please. You have to drop this lawsuit. Dad is talking about liquidating assets, hiding things. If you push this, we'll all lose everything. Can't we work something out?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honorable, and saw only a coward trying to save himself. "Caleb, you stole money from clients. You helped your father forge documents and plan fraud. You were going to throw your own mother onto the street. Why would I help you now?" His face went red, anger replacing desperation. "Because I'm your son. Because family is supposed to stick together. You should have thought about that before you laughed about making me homeless," I said quietly. "You chose your father's money over your mother's well-being. Now you get to live with that choice." I closed the door in his face, my hands shaking. Behind that door, I heard him kick the wall and shout, then his footsteps retreating. It hurt more than I'd expected. Dwight's full forensic report came back that afternoon. Marcus hadn't just hidden $2 million, he'd hidden close to $4 million over 10 years, using shell companies with names like Highline Consulting and Summit Management Services. He'd billed the ranch for services those fake companies never provided, then transferred the money offshore. Caleb's embezzlement totaled $130,000. Ethan had sold nearly $200,000 in equipment and pocketed the money. But the most damaging discovery was the developer deal. Vanessa's company had agreed to buy the ranch for $12 million, with Marcus receiving $8 million directly, money he planned to take to Costa Rica while claiming the ranch had been sold to pay debts. He was going to leave his sons with nothing while he retired in luxury with his mistress. Even Caleb and Ethan had no idea they were being betrayed. Helena called an emergency meeting with the county prosecutor. Wire fraud. Money laundering. Real estate fraud. Tax evasion. The prosecutor, Rita Chen, looked at me with something like awe. Mrs. Kemper, the evidence you've collected is better than most federal investigations. How did you know to track all of this? I smiled. I've been keeping records for 50 years. Old habits die hard. That night, the second call came. Ethan this time, his voice small and broken. Mom, they're saying I might go to prison. For selling equipment? I didn't know that was illegal. Dad told me the ranch needed cash flow. Mom, please, I have a daughter. Maddie is only 8 years old. She needs her father. My heart broke for little Maddie, but I'd learned that protecting my grandchildren meant teaching their fathers about consequences. Ethan, you're a 46-year-old man. You knew taking money that wasn't yours was wrong. You chose to do it anyway, and then you chose to throw me away when I became inconvenient. I love you, but I can't protect you from your own choices anymore. He sobbed on the phone, begging me to make it stop, promising anything. But promises from men who'd betrayed me meant nothing now. If this story is resonating with you, please hit that subscribe button. There are so many more stories like this that need to be told, and your support helps me keep sharing them. Now, let me tell you about the day everything came crashing down for them. The story broke in the Pine Ridge Chronicle on a Thursday morning, local ranching family under investigation for fraud. The reporter, Dakota Mills, had gotten wind of the criminal complaints and done her homework. The article detailed the offshore accounts, the embezzlement, the fraudulent divorce, and the development deal. By noon, it was the talk of the whole county. My phone started ringing with calls from people I hadn't heard from in years. But the most interesting call came from Warren Briggs, who owned the second-largest cattle operation in the county. Isla, I just read about what Marcus did to you. I'm immediately terminating Caleb's legal work for my ranch. I will not do business with thieves. Furthermore, if you're looking for a place to land, I'm opening a new operation in Wolf Creek and I need an experienced manager. The job is yours if you want it. 3 more ranchers called with similar offers. Marcus had spent 40 years building relationships in this community, and in 24 hours, his reputation was destroyed. My phone buzzed constantly with supportive messages. People from church committees, my book club, neighbors who'd known me since I was young. The community was rallying around me, and it was overwhelming in the best way. Marcus tried to control the narrative. He posted a long Facebook statement claiming I'd had a mental breakdown, that the divorce was for my own good, that the investigation was based on misunderstandings. But Dakota Mills published a follow-up article the next day with copies of the forged documents and quotes from Dwight's forensic report. The truth was out there, undeniable and damning. Marcus's post got torn apart in the comments by people who'd known us for decades. The development deal collapsed immediately. Vanessa's company released a statement saying they'd been unaware of the property ownership issues and were withdrawing their offer. I later learned that Vanessa herself had called off her relationship with Marcus, reportedly saying she didn't sign up for this kind of scandal. He'd lost his mistress, his money, his reputation, and his freedom all in 1 week. Caleb and Ethan tried to distance themselves from their father. Ethan posted his own Facebook statement claiming he'd been manipulated by Marcus, that he had no idea the equipment sales were illegal. Caleb hired his own attorney and filed paperwork claiming he was a victim of his father's scheme. But the community wasn't buying it. These were grown men who'd made their own choices. The state tax authorities showed up at the ranch on day 8, conducting a full audit. They seized computers, files, and records. Marcus stood in the driveway watching government agents carry boxes out of his office, and someone took a photo that ended up in the newspaper. He looked old suddenly, smaller than I'd ever seen him. Sage texted me that photo with the caption, "This is what karma looks like, Grandma." But the real turning point came when the FBI arrested Marcus at the First Mountain Bank. He'd apparently tried to access one of his offshore accounts to transfer money to a different hiding place, and the feds had been monitoring the account. They took him out in handcuffs in front of a dozen witnesses. The video ended up on the local news that night. I watched it in my motel room, and I felt empty. Not victorious. Not happy. Just sad that it had come to this. Helena called me that evening with an update. The FBI is offering Marcus a deal. If he cooperates fully, returns all the hidden money, and pleads guilty to the fraud charges, they'll recommend a reduced sentence. He's looking at 5 to 7 years instead of 20. His attorney is advising him to take it. She paused. Isla, this is almost over. The divorce is void, the property is legally yours, and Marcus will be in prison. You've won. Had I won? I had my land back, yes. I had justice, yes. But I'd lost my marriage, my relationship with my sons, and the family I'd built over 50 years. Winning felt an awful lot like grief. That night, I drove out to the ranch alone. The house was dark, police tape across the door from the search warrant. I walked to the barn where my father had taught me to ride horses when I was 6 years old. I sat on a hay bale and cried for everything I'd lost and everything I'd had to become to survive. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest, and I knew I'd have to face him in court. Helena prepared me carefully, running through possible questions and coaching me on staying calm. Isla, Marcus's attorney is going to try to paint you as vindictive, as someone who blew up her family over hurt feelings. You need to stay focused on the facts. The fraud. The embezzlement. The forged documents. Don't let them make this about wounded pride. The morning of the hearing, I wore the navy blue dress I'd worn to my daughter-in-law's funeral 12 years ago. It felt appropriate somehow, mourning the death of my family. Sage met me at the courthouse steps, holding my hand as we walked through a crowd of reporters. "Grandma, you've got this," she whispered. "You're the strongest person I know." Inside the courtroom, I saw Marcus for the first time since I'd driven away from the ranch. He'd lost weight, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame. He looked at me with something between hatred and desperation. Caleb and Ethan sat in the gallery behind him, both avoiding my eyes. The prosecutor Rita Chin stood when the judge entered, a stern woman in her 60s who'd apparently seen every kind of fraud case imaginable. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Helena presented our evidence methodically: the forged trust dissolution documents, the offshore account transfers, the fake vendor invoices, the email correspondence with Vanessa about the development deal. Dwight testified about his forensic findings, explaining how Marcus had systematically looted the ranch operation. The FBI agent who'd arrested Marcus testified about the money laundering scheme and Marcus's attempt to move funds while under investigation. Marcus's attorney, a slick man from Billings named Preston Yates, tried to argue that this was a civil dispute being inappropriately criminalized. "Your Honor, my client made some questionable financial decisions, but this is really a divorce case, not a fraud case. Mrs. Kemper is understandably hurt by the end of her marriage, but she's using the criminal justice system for revenge." Rita Chin objected immediately, and the judge sustained it. "Mr. Yates, your client hid $4 million offshore and forged legal documents. That's not a questionable decision. That's multiple felonies." Then Helena called me to the stand. I walked up there on my 75-year-old legs, my arthritis aching, and I told my story. I explained about finding the text messages, about overhearing the conspiracy through the heating vent, about 50 years of building a ranch that my husband had tried to steal from under me. I told them about signing those divorce papers on my birthday, about being told I was stupid and worthless, about being thrown out of my own home with 24 hours notice. Marcus's attorney cross-examined me aggressively. "Mrs. Kemper, isn't it true that you stopped actively managing the ranch 15 years ago? That you essentially retired and let your husband handle the business?" I looked him dead in the eye. I never stopped managing the ranch. I kept my own books, my own records, my own relationships with our clients. Just because my husband bought new software didn't mean I stopped doing the work. That's actually how I caught the fraud. I noticed the discrepancies because I'd never stopped paying attention. He tried a different angle. "Isn't it true that you were angry about your husband's relationship with Ms. Vanessa Sawyer? That this whole case is really about jealousy?" I felt my temper rise but kept my voice steady. "I was hurt by my husband's infidelity, yes. But this case is about him stealing $4 million and forging documents to steal my inheritance. If he'd wanted a divorce, he could have filed one honestly. Instead, he chose to commit multiple crimes. That's not about my jealousy. That's about his greed." The judge called a recess after my testimony, and I sat in the hallway with Sage and Helena. Marcus walked past us to the bathroom, and for a moment our eyes met. I saw fear there, and regret, but also anger. He mouthed something that looked like "I hate you" before his attorney pulled him away. Sage squeezed my hand. "Grandma, I'm sorry you had to marry such a terrible man." I smiled sadly. "He wasn't always terrible, baby. Or maybe he was and I just didn't want to see it." When the hearing resumed, the judge delivered her ruling. Marcus would be held pending trial, bail set at $500,000. Caleb would face charges for embezzlement with a separate hearing next month. Ethan would be charged as well, though his charges were less severe. The divorce decree was officially voided, all property transfers were reversed, and I was officially recognized as the sole legal owner of the ranch property. Judge Morrison looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Kemper, you attempted to defraud your wife of her inheritance, you laundered millions of dollars, and you showed a pattern of calculated cruelty toward a woman who devoted 50 years to building your success. I find your actions reprehensible." Marcus stood there, his shoulders slumped, as the bailiff led him back to holding. He didn't look at me again. Caleb and Ethan rushed out of the courtroom before I could even stand up, avoiding any confrontation. Helena put her hand on my shoulder. "Isla, you did it. The ranch is yours. Everything you built is protected now." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus in a jail cell, about my sons facing criminal charges, about how a family could fall apart so completely. I wondered if I'd done the right thing, if there was some other way I could have handled this. But then I remembered them laughing about making me homeless, and I knew I'd had no choice. Sometimes protecting yourself means watching people you love face consequences. Thank you for staying with me through this difficult part of my story. If you're finding strength in this, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Now let me tell you about what happened when I finally went home. The day I drove back to the ranch as its legal owner felt surreal. Helena had given me the keys that morning along with a stack of documents proving my ownership. "The property is secured, Isla. I've had the locks changed, and there's a restraining order preventing Marcus, Caleb, or Ethan from coming within 500 feet of the place. It's yours now. Go home. Home." The word felt strange after everything that had happened. I drove that familiar road, past the north pasture where my father had taught me to herd cattle, past the creek where my sons had learned to fish, past the gate with the Kemper Ranch sign that my grandfather had carved in 1889. I stopped the truck at that gate and just sat there for a moment, engine idling, looking at the land that had almost been stolen from me. The house was exactly as I'd left it 3 weeks ago, but it felt different knowing Marcus would never walk through that door again. I went room by room, looking at 50 years of my life preserved in photographs and furniture and memories. In the master bedroom, I found Vanessa's clothes already hanging in what had been my closet. Designer dresses, expensive shoes, silk scarves. I gathered them all up and put them in boxes for her to collect. This was my space now. In Marcus's office, I found the file cabinet where he'd kept his secrets. Inside were more documents I'd never seen, appraisals showing the ranch was worth close to $18 million, not the $8 million he'd told the development company. Letters from other women over the years, showing Vanessa wasn't his first affair. Business proposals showing he'd been planning to cut our sons out of their inheritance entirely. He'd been willing to betray everyone who loved him for money and a younger woman. I spent the afternoon going through every document, creating 3 piles, things for Helena, things for the prosecutors, and things to burn. Some secrets didn't need to be preserved, didn't need to hurt people any more than they already had. I carried that last pile out to the burn barrel behind the barn and watched 50 years of lies turn to ash. The smoke rose up into the Montana sky, and I felt something inside me release. That evening, Sage came out to the ranch with dinner from the diner in town. We sat on the porch watching the sunset, just like we'd done 100 times before. "Grandma, are you going to keep running the ranch yourself?" she asked. I'd been thinking about that question for days. "I'm 75 years old, baby. I can't manage 3,000 acres and 200 head of cattle alone anymore. But I'm not selling. This land has been in our family for 136 years, and it's staying in our family." What I'd decided was this: I'd hire Warren Briggs's son Cole to manage the day-to-day operations. He was 38, experienced, and honest. I'd keep oversight of the finances and the major decisions, but I'd let someone younger handle the physical work. The ranch would stay profitable, stay in the family, and maybe someday Sage would want to take it over. But that was her choice to make, not something I'd force on her like Marcus had tried to force his plans on everyone else. Sage told me she'd been to see her father Caleb in jail. "He's a mess, Grandma. He keeps saying he's sorry, that he never meant for things to go this far. He blames Grandpa for everything, says he was just following orders." I sighed, watching the sun turn the prairie grass gold. "Your father is a grown man who made his own choices. I hope he learns from this. I hope he becomes a better person. But that's his journey, not mine to fix." She asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them? Dad and Uncle Ethan and Grandpa Marcus?" I thought about that for a long time, watching the light fade from the sky. "Forgiveness is complicated, Sage. I don't hate them. But I also can't forget what they did, can't pretend it didn't happen. Maybe someday I'll be able to forgive them. But right now, I'm just trying to rebuild my life. That's all I have energy for." That night, I slept in my old bedroom for the first time in 3 weeks. It should have felt like home, but it felt like sleeping in a museum of my old life. I realized that even though I'd won the legal battle and saved my property, something fundamental had broken. I could never go back to being the woman I was before my 75th birthday. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, wiser, and more alone. Marcus's trial happened 4 months later, in early fall when the aspens were turning gold on the mountainsides. He'd taken the plea deal the FBI offered, plead guilty to wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud in exchange for a 7-year sentence with possibility of parole after 5. His attorney had advised him that fighting the charges would likely result in 20 years or more, so he had no real choice. The sentencing hearing was packed with reporters, curious locals, and people from the ranching community who wanted to see justice served. I sat in the front row with Helena on one side and Sage on the other. Marcus was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked like he'd aged 20 years in 4 months. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something there I hadn't expected: genuine remorse. The prosecutor outlined the full scope of Marcus's crimes for the judge. $4.2 million hidden in offshore accounts. Forged trust documents. Fake business entities used to launder money. Tax evasion spanning 10 years. The attempted sale of property he didn't own. Your Honor, Mr. Kemper didn't just commit fraud. He orchestrated a decade-long scheme to steal his wife's inheritance and leave her destitute. This was calculated, cruel, and deserves the maximum sentence within the plea agreement. Marcus's attorney argued for leniency, talking about his client's age, 78 now, his previously clean record, his remorse. Your Honor, my client made terrible mistakes, but he's not a career criminal. He's an old man who let greed cloud his judgment. He's lost everything: his wife, his reputation, his freedom, his relationship with his sons. He's already been punished in so many ways. Then the judge asked if Marcus wanted to make a statement. He stood slowly, his chains rattling, and turned to look at me. Isla, I know you probably won't believe this, but I am truly sorry. I convinced myself that the ranch was my achievement, my success, and I forgot that you built it alongside me every single day. I forgot that your grandfather's land was the foundation everything was built on. I let a younger woman flatter me, and I let my ego destroy everything that mattered. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I regret what I did to you. You deserved so much better. I sat there listening to him, searching for sincerity in his words. Part of me wanted to believe he meant it, wanted to believe the man I'd loved for 50 years was still in there somewhere. But I'd learned that apologies without changed behavior are just words, and Marcus had run out of chances to change. The judge sentenced him to 7 years in federal prison, with restitution of $4.2 million plus interest. He'd be 85 when he got out, if he lived that long. Caleb's sentencing came 2 weeks later. He received 3 years for embezzlement, with 2 years suspended and credit for time served. He'd be on probation for 5 years and would have to pay back the $130,000 he'd stolen. Ethan got 18 months, mostly probation, for his role in selling equipment illegally. Both of them lost their law licenses and would have felony convictions on their records forever. I attended both hearings but didn't speak at either one. What was there to say? They knew what they'd done. They knew they'd betrayed me. Sage spoke at her father's sentencing, though, and her words broke my heart. Dad, I love you, but I'm so disappointed in who you became. Grandma raised you to be honest and kind, and you chose to be neither. I hope you use this time to figure out who you want to be, because the person you've been isn't someone I can respect. After Ethan's sentencing, he approached me in the courthouse hallway. Mom, I know I don't deserve to ask this, but Maddie wants to see you. She misses her grandma. Would you be willing to visit with her? I'm not asking you to forgive me, just, please don't punish my daughter for my mistakes. I looked at my younger son, seeing the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. Ethan, I would love to see Maddie. Call me when you get out and we'll arrange something. But you and I need time before we can have a real relationship again. I need to heal first. The day after the last sentencing hearing, Helena and I sat in her office finalizing the last of the legal work. The ranch was officially mine, free and clear. The offshore money had been recovered and returned. Marcus's share of our joint accounts had been divided as part of the restitution. I was, at 75 years old, a wealthy woman in my own right. Isla, what are you going to do now? Helena asked. I'd been thinking about that question for months. I'm going to live, I said simply. I'm going to run my ranch the way my grandfather intended. I'm going to spend time with Sage and Maddie and any other grandchildren who want to know me. I'm going to stop sacrificing myself for men who don't appreciate me. I'm going to figure out who Isla Kemper is when she's not defined by her marriage or her role as a mother. For the first time in 50 years, I get to just be me. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, the ranch was thriving again. Cole Briggs had turned out to be an excellent manager, bringing in new breeding stock and modernizing our operations while respecting the traditions my grandfather had established. The cattle were healthy, the land was well maintained, and we were more profitable than we'd been in a decade. I'd discovered that when you remove embezzlers and fraud from a business, it tends to do a lot better. I'd made changes to the house too. I'd redecorated the master bedroom, replacing all the furniture that Marcus had chosen with pieces I actually liked. I'd turned his office into a library, filling the shelves with books I'd never had time to read when I was busy running a ranch and raising a family. I'd planted a vegetable garden in the backyard, something I'd always wanted but Marcus said was too much work for someone your age. Turned out I had plenty of energy when I wasn't being undermined constantly. Sage had moved into one of the ranch's guest cabins, taking a job as Cole's assistant manager while she figured out what she wanted to do with her life. Having her nearby was a blessing I hadn't expected. We had coffee together every morning on my porch, watching the sun come up over the mountains. She'd started calling me by my first name sometimes instead of Grandma, treating me more like a friend than just a family matriarch. It felt good to be seen as a whole person. I'd started seeing Maddie every other weekend. Ethan would drop her off on Friday afternoons, and we'd spend the weekend riding horses, baking cookies, watching movies, all the grandmother things I'd missed while dealing with the legal battles. She was 9 now, old enough to know something bad had happened with her father but young enough not to understand the full extent. I'd decided to let her father explain it when she was older. My job was just to love her. The hardest part was the loneliness. 50 years of marriage, even a troubled marriage, meant I'd gotten used to having someone else in the house. There were nights I'd wake up and reach for Marcus before remembering he was in federal prison. There were moments I'd want to tell him about something funny that happened with the cattle, then remember he tried to steal everything from me. Grief and anger don't cancel each other out, they just exist side by side. I joined a support group for women over 70 who were rebuilding their lives after divorce. We met every Tuesday at the community center, 8 women who'd all been discarded by their husbands for various reasons. We called ourselves the Phoenix Society, because we'd all risen from the ashes of our old lives. Hearing their stories made me realize I wasn't alone, that this epidemic of older women being abandoned was more common than anyone wanted to admit. One woman in the group, Judith, had been married for 52 years when her husband divorced her for his dental hygienist. Another, Patricia, had built a successful real estate business only to have her husband steal the company and leave her with nothing. Every woman had a similar story, decades of devotion, followed by betrayal, followed by the hard work of rebuilding. We supported each other, celebrated each other's victories, and held each other through the grief. I'd also reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with over the years. Women from high school who'd moved away but were now widowed or divorced and living alone. We started a book club that met monthly, drinking wine and discussing novels and gossiping like we were teenagers again. I realized I'd spent so much of my life focused on my family that I'd neglected my friendships, and now those friendships were saving me. Marcus wrote me letters from prison. One every month, like clockwork. They were always the same: apologies, regrets, memories of better times, hopes that I might visit him someday. I read every letter once, then filed them away in a box in the attic. I wasn't ready to respond yet. Maybe I never would be. But I kept them because they were part of my story, and I'd learned that you can't heal from things you pretend didn't happen. Caleb wrote too, less frequently but more desperately. He'd lost everything: his law practice, his reputation, his marriage after his wife divorced him during the trial. He was living in a halfway house in Billings, working as a paralegal for an attorney who specialized in helping ex-convicts rebuild their lives. His letters were full of 12-step program language about making amends and taking responsibility. I didn't know if his transformation was real or just another manipulation. Time would tell. Sage gave a toast that made me cry. To my grandma, the strongest woman I know. She lost everything except herself, and she's taught me that sometimes that's all you need. Here's to new beginnings and second chances and the power of refusing to be defeated. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a year: hope. Real, solid hope for the future. Thank you so much for staying with me through my entire story. If this resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. But more importantly, if you're going through something similar, know this: you are stronger than you think. Your worth is not determined by the people who betray you. Rebuild yourself, protect what's yours, and never let anyone make you feel small. The best revenge isn't destroying them, it's becoming the person you were always meant to be. Leave a comment below telling me what you learned from my story. I read every single one. And remember, it's never too late to start over.